So I'm sure we have a lot of people here who know Lean Startup. When did the Lean Startup book come out?
2011, so just over 6 years ago.
So maybe just set, for the few people in here who maybe haven't read Lean Startup, just give us a grounding on what are the sort of basics of Lean Startup, and then let's focus on the startup way.
Sure, yeah. So, my background is in software engineering. I come from Silicon Valley and, did venture-backed startups, most of which failed. So, hi, I'm a big failure. If you follow me, you can be a big failure too. Like, I know that's not how you're supposed to start these things, but yeah, like go failure. And I had tried to, after I had some success, try to talk about how do we make entrepreneurial activities more disciplined, more rigorous, and more customer-centric, more scientific in decision-making, bring ideas from lean manufacturing, that's where Lean Startup comes from, to focus on cycle time, and eventually had the realization that to stay true to a startup's vision, you're going to have to change strategy from time to time, and it's useful to have a conceptual framework for doing that and try to get to the moment of what we call a pivot sooner. So if you feel like pivot is a piece of overused business jargon, that's probably my fault. So I'm sorry about that. But that was the concept of the Lean Startup, and a minor part of the Lean Startup was also that we should treat entrepreneurship like a management discipline. And try to get better at it over time. And people got pretty psyched about the minimum viable product and the other stuff that fits nicely on a bumper sticker. Not so much about the boring things about management and accounting, but I have tried, as a through line in both books really to say, we got to have some rigor to this if we're going to get better at it. So an improvement in practice for us as an industry, as a community, I think is really important.
So Eric and I first met just as as the first book came out. Yeah. So it was not far from here. I think it was down in Soho. Someone was having a book party for you. And I go to meet Eric and get a copy of the book and just saying, hey, at the time I was at GE, we need this. And everybody else was figuring that out too. Lean Startup started as a movement. But we tried to create it as a movement inside GE. Maybe we can just sort of spend a little bit of time setting the stage, and then I think that sets up the backdrop for the startup way. So I find Eric and say, hey, we're trying to be more entrepreneurial in GE, and you go,
yeah,
what?
Right, yeah. Sure you are.
Yeah.
What's funny, I mean, first of all, Beth is an amazing executive and has must be the best early warning radar detection for new ideas of any corporate executive I've ever met. And so it was in retrospect, no surprise to me that she was there right when this was just starting to talk about GE. But that was, I didn't know GE from any other company, and I didn't know Beth at that time. And a lot of big company people over the years would come up to me and say, my company should really act like a startup. And I'd be like, good luck.
I think you asked me if you had to wear a suit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
I was like, can you come and talk to us? And I think you really thought maybe you had to wear a suit.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I almost was kind of like, is that even really my department? I feel like you're on the wrong floor of the store. I don't know. That's not my thing. But Beth, gave me the kind of nudge to be like, no, really, let's talk about this. And I'm serious about it. And the vast majority of corporate executives that come to see me and ask me to talk, that's the last I ever hear from them. It's they're like, yeah, they're sort of interested in innovation as, a part-time thing, maybe whatever. Beth took it seriously and asked me to kind of come into the company, and we did, I don't know, we did some talks and events, and you guys had a really interesting business model innovation center.
We had sort of an innovation lab. We called it an accelerator.
Yeah. So
we were bringing in coaches, and we thought you'd be a coach. We didn't know you would kick off a movement inside of our company.
Me either. Believe me, it was no master plan. And I think there was just a certain confluence of, the movement that was really growing and burgeoning around Lean Startup, and some trends that you guys were seeing in the company, and a kind of a hunger inside the company to do something different. So I know somehow it all came together. You probably know better than I. Why did it happen then? I actually don't know.
I'll set a little bit of the stage. So Eric comes with us to a big executive meeting we had at GE with 200 people, and you could see the thought bubble over many of their heads. Okay, software dude. Eric's sitting there going, failure, fail fast. I may write change orders 50 times a day, and you could see them going, I make change orders once a year. I may make complicated things, but there was enough of what Eric said that they were willing to take him on. And so we did a pilot project with Eric, and it became really a masterful way to show change. And Eric had this incredible style of saying to people, I can help you get here faster, better. We adopted Lean Startup. We, of course, having to brand it ourselves, called it FastWorks. It's really Lean Startup, but we added a few other change things. But it really, you have a way that people listen to you. It's because you're an entrepreneur, perhaps? I mean, explain to people, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so, like a formal definition, and this is part of Lean Startup, I wrote that a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And, just as a kind of like a matter of deductive logic, I was like, hey, it's interesting that that definition doesn't say how big your company is, and it doesn't say what sector of the economy or industry, so therefore, this is a generally applicable framework, which, that sounded pretty good to me at the time. But I didn't really know if it was really true. That was just a consequence of the theory. That's just what was throwing it out there for a suggestion. And so having the chance to actually come in and try to put those ideas to the test, I guess part of what makes you an entrepreneur is that you get used to being in highly uncertain situations. So the fact that I had no idea how this was going to work at GE, like that was not in any way unusual to me to compare to all the other things I do in my career, which I'm used to feeling like I have no idea what's going to happen. And it's an experiment worth running. And I think it gave me an advantage, which was, I can really remember that room. First of all, it was Beth's meeting, like Beth's little segment of the meeting to have me there, which I feel like, you were all kind of out on a limb yourself to bring me into a meeting that's not like a lot of outsiders present for, which I always felt, like I needed to live up to this opportunity to say something. But when there was this incredible skepticism of all these dudes, especially, you can imagine, and they would ask me these hard questions about, well, how do I know this is going to work, in this situation, and what about that? I was kind of like, well, I don't know, and I'm not here to pretend that I know. That's a good question. Let's run the experiment. Let's go find out. Like, your skepticism might be validated, in which case I'll learn something, or my idea could be validated and I'll learn something, or maybe between us we'll come up with something new together. So I think that gave me an ability to put people not on the defensive. Now, it helped a lot the way I remember is we gave our little talk. Jeff Immelt, who was at that time chairman CEO, he's like sitting in the front row. I'm way overdressed, by the way. I was in a suit, and Jeff thought that was hysterical.
Yeah, he was wearing his typical golf sweater.
Yeah, he's in a golf
jeans.
sweater, and he's like, "Why are you Silicon Valley dude? What are you doing in a suit?" And anyway, Beth, we have our little chat just like this on stage. Beth says, "Any questions?" There are no questions. Okay, everyone's to see what does Jeff think? That's all anyone cares about in the room. So all eyes are on Jeff, and he said, "I'll never forget this." He says, "So and so." He calls on one of his P&L leaders by name. "Your division only makes $500 million a year. How come you're not already doing this?" You remember that? And all of a sudden there were a lot of questions in the room. So that was very helpful to have that context of, hey, why aren't, and he was so smart about it. Like his wisdom really I always admired, which is he was really smart about it. He didn't say, "All you idiots, you have to do this." He said, "Why aren't we doing it? Like, what's the reason?" And anyway, we had that conversation, and it was pretty theoretical, but then he had asked us to do a pilot project as an experiment. So we literally, my recollection from that, we went that morning from that meeting with all these senior executives to an afternoon session where they had picked one individual project. Did Jeff pick the project?
We picked the project because it was going to take 5 years to get it done.
Yeah.
And it was already over budget. And we desperately needed this project, this new product. And we needed to understand, why is it taking so long? Why are we so bureaucratic? And why can't we innovate faster?
Yeah.
Those were the problems we were trying to solve. And that was a lot of burden for you to clean up, like decades worth of getting it wrong.
I know, exactly. Well, I remember Jeff was like, "I am tired of 5-year plans. I don't want to hear it. Don't give me any more 5-year plans." So anyway, this project was called the Series X engine. It's a reciprocating diesel platform. Raise your hand if you know what a reciprocating diesel platform is. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah, me neither. I had no idea. I was like, what is it? What is it used for? Is it a box? Is it a machine? I was like, how big? Is it bigger than a bread box? Is it bigger than a car? Like, this is a large piece of industrial equipment. It's as far from software as you can get. So I think it was very carefully chosen to be something that, if it could work here, maybe that would be indicative that it could work on other things.
And it involved multiple different business units. So
it was like stuck in like
mess.
like classic use case that doesn't quite line up with any existing place on the org chart, and so it's being funded across 2 different divisions, and there's all kinds of politics. You can imagine. Those of you who work in large companies know exactly what I'm talking about. So we did this workshop. Now I want you to visualize this scene. So we walk. We're now at GE's very famous Crotonville facility. It's beautiful. We're in a like Harvard Business School style classroom with the tiered seating. Me, the 3 engineers from the Series X team who have been summoned up from, were they based in Houston or something? From Texas to be at this workshop at corporate. That they've been volunteered. And then there are 25 corporate vice presidents. Yeah, all these senior executives in the back of the room just to observe. So these poor guys, it's like such a terrible setup for a workshop, truly. And so we started by having just like a conversation where I was like, listen, I don't know an engine from anything. So you teach me and like present the currently approved business case for why, like, what are we going to do? Because I've been told this thing is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. We're going to take 5 years. And I just was like, tell me why it's going to take 5 years. Well, it turns out the reason it takes 5 years is it's a very difficult engineering challenge. This one device is going to be used for, mobile fracking and stationary drilling and marine electric and distributed power generation. I was like, okay, on a boat, on a plane, by sea, by land, on a train, like, it's like Dr. Seuss level to me, like, okay. And so it's going to take a long time. Like the engineering challenge of this is really difficult.
Basically, they were engineering in every possible use case that they
just
could
like think about this piece of equipment has to work like on a boat and like, in a desert. And it's like, it's a very difficult scenario. And it has to be super efficient. It has to be this and it has to be that. And so they were presenting this plan. And then they showed a graph that I'll never forget as long as I live, the revenue forecast by year for this project. It was a bar chart. Visualize it. So bars for each year for the next, 30 years. Exactly how much money we're going to make every year. And of course, the first 5 bars on the chart are blank. No customers for 5 years. Obviously, while we're in our stealth R&D winning the Nobel Prize, we solved this problem. We need to do this. But then the numbers were like this ridiculous hockey stick shape. And like pretty soon we're making like just, even a lot of money, even by GE standards. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know anything about diesel engines, but I know this graph very well. Like, step into my office, my friends. I mentioned I'm from Silicon Valley. We make this chart all the time. We're really good at it. That's our like leading export after hype and buzzwords, the hockey stick shaped chart. So I got you covered. And so I remember asking the question, remember this? I said, everyone raise your hand if you believe this forecast.
And not many people had asked that.
It was almost an irritating or like taboo question to ask because everyone raised their hand. Like, of course, kid, you don't understand. The brightest minds of the GE Corporation in finance have vetted this thing. This is the basis of it. And people were not having a good time at this workshop. Like, how dare you suggest that we would? And I was like, I'm so sorry. My apologies. With all due respect, and just picked a bar at random from the chart. But seriously. Who here actually believes that in the year 2035 you're going to make exactly $1.35 billion in revenue? And everyone's like, well, when you put it that way, of course, we're not sure. Anyway, so we did this workshop, and over the course of a couple of hours, we started to ask ourselves, what are the leap of faith assumptions that have to be true for this project to be successful? And what would it take to test those in a little bit less time than 5 years? So do we have to solve all 5 use cases at once? What would happen if we picked only one use case? And what would happen if we started to really talk about not just the technical assumptions of what can be built here, but the commercial assumptions about who's the customer and how are we going to reach them and how we figure out the distribution strategy and all these questions that were buried in Appendix B in tiny font, an asterisk in the business plan. After we build this thing for 5 years, then we'll create a new distribution system from scratch. And they're like, excuse me, can we talk more about that? And I remember one of the engineers eventually was like, well, if you only wanted to make one engine for one customer and you were willing to pick this particular use case, that wouldn't take 5 years. That would only take 18 months. And I'm like, ooh, now we're making some progress.
Yeah. And that was the Eureka moment. I think that was and it wasn't a technical challenge. It was getting out of our own way in many cases. And
I remember one of the other engineers was and we were playing Name That Tune. It was well, you could do it in 18 months? Well, hold on. We already have an existing engine that's not that different from a performance point of view in this one specific use case. So if you only care about stationary drilling where the weight of the physical device doesn't matter so much, we could take the 616 and modify it, and that would only take 6 months. And the other guy's like, 6 months? No. If you were willing to, and we're as the problem domain, as we de-scope the experiment down to a single customer, single use case, and they start to pick the easy ones, because why not? They're getting it down to a matter of months rather than years. And I remember asking in the room, I was like, okay, this sounds pretty good. any of you fancy VPs here, anyone have a customer who might want to buy that? And one of the VP members, like, someone was like, I got a customer who comes in, every day asking me for that exact thing. Like, I could make that sale in a heartbeat. And I was sitting there being like, this is about to go so well. We're going to get this thing, like, think about this is an order of magnitude improvement in time to market from 5 years to 6 months, and I'm going to be a hero, and this is going to be good. And then finally, one of the VPs who was just not at all having a good time, who shall remain nameless, although Beth and I remember well, it just crossed his arm, and he was like, I'm sorry, time out. What the bleep is the point of selling only one engine to one customer? Think about it. We were about to make $5 billion. And now we're going to make 25. So I think actually we're going to lose money now because the 616 is too expensive. So we're going to actually lose money for the privilege of selling one engine to one customer. And like, why am I in this workshop again? And I remember saying to him, you're right. If you believe this plan and it's going to work, then learning this thing is a waste of time. You already know that customers want this product, so this whole thing is... And he was like, great, if it's a waste of time, like, I'm out of here. And that absolutely would have been my last day at GE for sure, except that Beth and some of her colleagues were like, wait a second. Didn't we just say a minute ago that we don't know if this plan is gonna work? And we're not sure if this forecast is right. And didn't we just say that there are these commercial assumptions that need testing? And gosh, wouldn't it be nice to know if, as actually, if you remember, turned out to be the case, this customer would not buy the product, to know why? And wouldn't it be nice to be able to engineer to a use case that we understand? So like the conversation evolved from me, the outside like Silicon Valley jerk, telling people that they're stupid, which is not a great place to start, to... It's
not really good for change to tell people they're
tell people
stupid.
stupid is not
work.
where I learned that earlier in my life, that is not a good way. And the conversation evolved to the executives among themselves starting to debate what was possible. And when you reframe the problem that they're trying to solve from how do we get this $5 billion fantasy plan built to how do we start that learning process, how do we build the minimum viable product? The engineers themselves had all the expertise we needed. Listen, I still didn't know how to build a diesel engine at the end, but they could provide that expertise. That wasn't the hard part, and that was the start of this incredible journey.
And for us, it became a movement inside. We did thousands of these kinds of projects, everything from handheld ultrasounds to help midwives in India to how do you do better ERP systems. It really became a way to make innovation happen faster. But it wasn't just us. I mean, that's what brings us to the Startup Way. You found this, what you're doing here with the Startup Way is showing us how this is moved across big companies, government organizations. I mean, tell us how it leaped from small companies to big, and what are some of the learnings that you want people to get from the book?
Sure, yeah, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I came with the same prejudice that everybody has, that big company people are not very creative and pretty boring and not too intelligent, and that's why they don't make as much.
All?
Oh, is that right? And and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, then that's why if they were really creative and whatever, they would have come to Silicon Valley and they'd be starting companies too. So like we have this just like total myopia about what it is that you need to succeed as an entrepreneur. And the funny part of it is, of course, many people start a startup because they hate working at big companies. And I'm always like, if you hate big companies so much, why are you trying to create a new one? And they're like, but my company's going to be different. And I'm like, because why? I'm like, well, we're going to build our organization to the exact same org chart that big companies use. We use the exact same compensation and budgetary policies that big companies use. We're going to have the exact same departments. We're going to have the same matrix management, the same, and but what? Like, but we're cool and we have beanbag chairs and whatever. Like, what's the plan structurally to make sure that you don't have this problem? So I think the distinction between big company and startup is a false distinction, because startups are not intentionally small. They're often unintentional not-for-profits, right? Like they do stay small, but that's not the plan. That's not the idea. And so what I noticed was many of the companies that had been early adopters of Lean Startup back in 2009, 10, 11, some of those CEOs would call me up again and say, hey, remember when we were talking about minimum viable product? Like, that was cool, but didn't you say something about management, something or other? And now my company has 1,000 employees. Could we have that conversation again now that I'm paying attention? And so we started to work again with some of the same companies I'd worked with earlier, but now at a much larger scale. And the founders would go through this weird, through the looking glass experience where they have to start to see themselves not as the hero entrepreneur who makes all the decisions, but as the leader who has to inspire the entrepreneurs that work for them to do things that they found very natural, but now at a different scale. So it was like this weird double life, because I'd be hanging out with Beth in the morning, and then I would be with like a totally scrappy, hot startup in the afternoon, and we'd be having the same conversation. And like, geez, more than 100 years old. Some of these companies are less than 5 years old. Why are they having the same problems? Well, I already gave you the answer. They're built to the same old-fashioned blueprint that we've been using since Alfred Sloan figured it out in the 1920s.
In fact, you lay out a vision for a modern company through this. Give us a sense of some of the things a modern company has to have.
Yeah, this is inspired by something that Jeff said to me once. He's like, nobody wants to work in an old-fashioned company. Nobody wants to invest in an old-fashioned company. No one wants to buy products from an old-fashioned company. So how do we create, not just create the marketing for, but how do we really be a truly modern company? And to me, the essence of a modern company is you're like harnessing the creativity and talent of every person that works for you. So if I were to pick an employee at random in an old-fashioned company, and I say I roll a 300,000 sided die, and it pops up your employee number, and I say, okay, if you had a great idea for how to improve this company, innovate, bring us into a new market, something that we really need to do, how would you get it implemented? What's the plan to test out your idea? And most employees are like, well, I guess I would ask my manager to ask her manager to ask his manager to ask the peer-wise manager in a parallel function to ask their subordinate to ask theirs, and by the time they've sketched out this plan in their head, they're like, forget it. Yeah, it's not worth it, right? Why bother start? I'll just do my regular job, right? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Not at your company, but you have a friend, maybe. So in a modern company, we have an automatic process for when we have a good idea to test it. It's just considered like a normal thing that we do. If it's just a simple little idea, we let individual people, we teach them how to do that. We have a process for doing things like minimum viable product and A/B testing, and it's a normal part of everything we do. But if it's a worthwhile idea, if it seems like it could potentially be something disruptive for us, then we can put a startup on it. We call it, in Startup Way, the startup as an atomic unit of work. It's just a tool in your management toolbox. It's like, Amazon famously has the 2-pizza team, a team no bigger than you can feed with 2 pizzas. It's just, there's certain problems that a startup is the right team form to go tackle them. Problems with high uncertainty, problems where we're building a new product or entering a new market, or heck, building a new IT system, or when we're partnering with a startup, anything with uncertainty attached to it, then that's the right form. And so a modern company just has that as like an automatic reflex, so much so that I try to advocate in the book that we should consider entrepreneurship the missing function in the corporate org chart. Because for most companies, when I talk to them, I say, who's in charge of innovation? Who's in charge of commercializing new products? Most companies do not have a Beth who really understands what we're talking about. Most CEOs tell me either it's someone's part-time job, so they've assigned innovation to the CIO, who's assigned it to his deputy or something, or it's the CTO or sometimes the head of marketing. But whoever it is, this person has a very difficult day job, and but on the side, they're also supposed to do innovation too. You're like, that's not very serious. Or they say it's everybody's job. There's no function for everyone's supposed to think like an entrepreneur and be innovative. And can you imagine if we put up with that BS in any other function? Marketing is everybody's job. We don't need a CMO. We don't need a global standard for what marketing.
Most people think it is their job anyway. So
right, exactly. It's ridiculous. Oh, we don't need finance. We don't need a CFO. Finance is everybody's job. It's true. You all go to prison if you screw it up. So we don't need we don't need to have standards of financial accountability. We don't need to have audit. It's everybody's job. We would find that ridiculous. But entrepreneurship, we're we don't have any process for it, so therefore we can never get good at it. So that to me is essential.
Is about, you mentioned when you started out, is about a tolerance for failure, a tolerance for ambiguity. Let's talk a little bit about failure. I don't know, who here likes to fail? Okay.
Okay. They're wired a little different than the rest of us.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But a modern company, an entrepreneur has to be okay with failure. How have you learned through Lean Startup and the Startup Way to legislate that, to lead through failure?
Yeah, well, in most organizations, it's not, people don't fear failure, they fear punishment. Okay, let's be honest, right? Human beings do not have some kind of intrinsic inability to experiment and learn, but if you get hit with the electric shock every time, or you believe that's what's going to happen, then I talk to a lot of executives who are I wish we punished people more for failure. I wish people would get fired for failure. We never fire anyone around here, but also still people are afraid of failure. And I think the concept that's really helpful is the concept I call career equity, Because that's truly, like in most organizational contexts, that's the compensation that matters. Not what your salary and bonus are this year, but what are your expectations of future career prospects? And what are the behaviors you think will do to be promoted, to get to that job that you aspire to one day have control over the resources or maybe even over the direction of the organization. And career equity is just as valid in a startup, big company, nonprofit, government agency. Like everybody has a career aspiration and they have a perception of their probability of success at that. And in most organizations, if you are perceived to have failed, that's damaging to your career equity. And that's the problem we have to fix. We have to celebrate not the failure itself, but to say if someone takes a smart experiment, even if it doesn't work out just the way they expected, that's actually a productive failure. And if somebody pretends that they never fail, that person is lying. So let's just say that. Like I've been trying to get people to put in their performance reviews, how many productive failures did you have this year? If it's
a new
zero,
metric you're suggesting.
yeah, it's like a very simple metric. Just talk to me about that. And of course, immediately begs the question, well, what counts as a productive failure? It's like, okay, great, now we can talk about that. Now we can admit that we fail. It happens.
You're also suggesting that leaders have to ask questions differently. Maybe you can share with people, you have some great questions that come out of Lean Startup. Of course, I ask you when you're drinking.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
I'm like, my voice is kidding out.
but what can leaders do to ask the right questions and encourage the conversation
No, it's totally.
around
And the
failure?
foundation of this whole thing is how do we hold people accountable? And do we reward and honor people who pretend to be super, like very predictable and always do the same thing? Or are we willing to focus on learning and discovery and experimentation, not as the only cultural value, but as an important cultural value? And my favorite questions for leaders are, what did you learn and how do you know? The best VCs I know, those are the questions that they want to ask at board meetings. Like that is really the question that can unlock not what did you fail at, but what did you learn? If we can show that a failure was productive, that we figured out a new strategy that worked better than the one we had before, that's ultimately saving the company a lot of money. So you remember this project we had at GE. There was a new healthcare product that one of the teams wanted to build, and they had requested $1 million budget. And there was, budgetary politics, so should we spend $1 million to enter this new market? And somebody said, hey, why don't we just do an MVP, because it was early on, why don't we just do a $100,000 experiment to figure out if this is actually a good idea? So they built a prototype, the non-functional prototype. They didn't, it's not a medical device that you could sell. So they took it around to some customers and tried to gauge their interest. And they came back after a few months and said, you know what? There's no business here. This was a bad idea. And I think they were kind of expecting the traditional response, which was, you just wasted $100,000 of the company's money. But the FastWorks team was saying, no, hold on. We just saved the $900,000 that we didn't have to spend on this bad product. And that change in mindset
was
was
a huge
profound.
change in mindset. And what happened is people come back now and they say, I don't need all this money because I have a better idea or a better way I want to go forward. So people are willingly sort of owning that and trying to get more opportunity out of it.
Yeah, and that's what really, like, startup efficiency, right? Like people sometimes think, like, how does lean startup? If it's lean, it's supposed to save me money or how it makes it more efficient. It's not about, you have cheaper desk furniture or don't have good health benefits or whatever. Like, it's fundamentally about getting more learning per dollar that we spend, more swings of the bat, more opportunities to try a different strategy until we get it right. And that it's a really profound savings when you can start to do that at a high scale, because not only are you just eliminating a lot of unproductive work. I mean, think about how many corporate reviews you've ever sat in your life where for the 10 people in the meeting, we had to have 10 pre-meetings. You know what I'm talking about? To make sure that we knew what each executive... So like the meeting itself is a complete waste of time because we've already had the meeting and made the decision in advance, but we can't admit that. So it's like it's both 10 times more expensive and worthless. You eliminate all that, right? So you just like stop doing that. And then on top of that, every once in a while, one of your innovations really pays off, and then you have this positive variation in all this, productivity unlocking. So it's a fun, like really energizing management principle because you both get productivity and savings and growth at the same time. It's not like you cut a bunch of jobs and have a bunch of layoffs. Like you unlock new sources of growth at the same time you're eliminating all this bureaucratic nonsense.
So we're going to go to some questions here in a minute. Talk about how you put the process together for this book. It was unusual. You actually took your toolkit to work.
Yeah, thank you.
You created a minimally viable product. You went to Kickstarter. Walk us through that. I think one, it's a fresh approach to publishing.
Thank you.
It's community building. What'd you learn? What'd you
Any
do?
Kickstarter backers in the audience? Yes. Oh, thank you so much. See, that's exactly the ratio. Like, right? Not everybody had to be part of the MVP, but just enough to be representative. So I'm very grateful. Yeah. So this is, and some folks from my publisher are here. So I say this with them present, and I'm very grateful to them for allowing this experiment, which is not by no means the norm. I became obsessed after Lean Startup was published with what is the author's moral responsibility for the things that people misunderstand about your writing. Because, there was like a whole controversy, remember recently, about people criticizing Clay Christensen because idiots in Silicon Valley cannot use the word disruption properly, and that's somehow his fault. And I was like, part of me is like, come on, man, this is like greatest management theorist of our time. You're giving me a hard time about these doofuses who they never read his book for sure, right? They didn't even bother Googling it even one time. So if you go on Wikipedia for 10 seconds, you can find out what his theory is. It's very popular, but people using it wrong. But so I'm defensive on other authors' behalf, but when people misunderstand my work, I was really like, when I'm sitting there as a consultant or an investor, working with someone, if they misunderstand, I can be like, that's not what I said, pay attention. But when I hand someone a book, that's it. If people on average misconstrue what I say, that I have some responsibility for that. So I really ought to try to figure out how to prevent that from happening. So I took a lot of in the course of doing work with G and a number of my other consulting clients, I had built up this library of kind of exercises and workshop material and case studies that I would use to help people adopt Lean Startup in these different contexts. And so I had this idea to build a Kickstarter campaign around a book which I called The Leader's Guide, which was designed explicitly as an MVP. So we did exactly one print run of it. We only made it available to Kickstarter backers. We started a community site for my friends at Mighty Bell, who created a private site where we could test ideas from the book with them and kind of go on the journey with them. And the idea was everyone who backed the campaign also gets this book, although we've had some ebook delivery problems. So stop sending me angry emails, please. We're working on it, I promise. And Kickstarter is a real pain, and there's all kinds of difficulty to it. But to me, it was so worth it because so many of the ideas, getting a chance to put them in print and see how actual customers actually respond to them, allow me to figure out a lot more about what works and what doesn't, and all that learning, you're all the beneficiaries of that learning in the new book.
So give some advice to everybody here. If they were to pick up the book tonight, or if they already have it, they finish reading it, and they go to work Monday, what would be a couple of tips on how to work and think the startup way?
You'll remember when we did the GE FastWorks Roadshow, this was like a crazy 6 months of my life where we trained every CEO of every GE business and all of their direct reports and everybody at what GE calls the executive band and above. That's 5,000 people?
Yeah.
So it was just an incredible amount of work to socialize this broadly within the company, what we call phase 2 of the transformation deployment. If you read the book, you'll get to read about all the 3 phases. They're scintillating, I promise. And we would end each of those workshop training sessions with really urging the executives to put this into practice soon, before they forgot and before they kind of lost the inspiration that you would get from having really immersed yourself in it. We would always say, listen, on Monday, whatever next Monday is, we want you to run an experiment on Monday. Not plan it on Monday or have a meeting about it on Monday. Start, complete, learn all in one day. So pick something small enough that you can do that. Because, look, I do not want to be your guru, okay? I really don't. And I'm of the Peter Drucker school of gurus. He famously said, people call me a guru because they can't spell charlatan. Okay, so I do not want to be your guru. You've
been pretty consistent. Throughout GE, you were like, I am not a consultant.
I'm not a consultant. I do not run a consulting company. I don't have 100 associates to send to tell you all that you can't live without me or whatever. My view is 100% that you have to make these ideas your own or it's not going to work. So don't take my word for it. Take whatever your enthusiasm or your skepticism and just run an experiment to reveal if the theory is correct or not. That's all we can do. And if we're going to claim as a movement to be a scientific theory, we can't be but take that on faith. Come on, man, that's not right. So, and everyone says they're going to do this, and then they don't do it. They're like, well, I get the theory of it, of course, I get the concept of it, but I for some reason. So, my real advice to you, honest to God, is what day of the week is it? I actually have no idea.
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay, so Monday's
Yeah,
like
they got a long time. They got a lot of work. They got a lot of time to
you
plan.
get so
this.
much time. I sometimes do these workshops on a Friday, so like you get 2 extra days. Like pick an accountability partner. If you came here with a friend, like just make a little pact with each other. Or if you have someone, just talk to them afterwards. Be like, listen, just call me at the end of the day on Monday and ask me, what did I learn from my experiment? And then if it was interesting, maybe do it again on Tuesday. Like get yourself into a build, measure, learn cadence measured in days and hours, not weeks and months. And just that little bit of internal transformation, as you start to live this yourself, like can be the start of a seed that can eventually grow into you trying to teach it to others. And like, don't let it be somebody else's problem. Like as much as my publisher would love for me to tell you, buy one for your whole company and make everybody read it, like don't do that first. Do it later. But like, do eventually buy 1 million copies, of course. But more importantly, like do the transformation yourself. Test it out. See if it's not going to magically change your life overnight. Okay, it's not going to help you lose weight and make you live forever and make you beautiful. Like it's not an instantaneous cure for anything. But what it can do, the theory makes very specific predictions about what should happen if you do this kind of experimentation. So see if I'm right, and if I'm not right, and you learn something new, like. I'll come to your event in a few years. So tell me about it, please. I look forward to learning from you.
Great. So we would love to take some questions now. We've got Kaylin with a microphone.
We're going to start on this side here.
Thank you. Alicia Ness, it's wonderful to be here. I was at an event a bazillion years ago when the Lean Startup had just come out in DC, and I have forever called you Startup Jesus, which you will continue to be. My question is...
Did you know that you're called that?
No, I
it's
did.
just me.
I didn't
I'm
know. Thank
starting
you.
a
Thank you.
movement. Now all
That's
of
a
you
good
can
one.
carry
You're
that
not
out into the
helping me
world.
with my Lean Startup is not a religion. You cannot be excommunicated. Okay, that's
That's
great.
why all these people are here.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
So my question is it's a little bit of a two-part question. One, how does Lean methodology or Lean startup methodology intersect with design thinking and this whole design thinking movement that's also overtaken business? And then how do we confront people who have just such a fixed mindset that the idea of experimenting and the value of experimenting is not even worth considering?
And maybe throw in there Agile and some of the other things.
Oh, sure, yeah.
There's a lot of...
Okay, I'll let you in on a secret. Sometimes when I do corporate meetings, they're functionally segregated. So I'll have like a room full of designers or a room full of engineers or it's just the supply chain people or just the finance. So like whatever it is, if I do such an event, I always get your exact question except about whatever their functional thing is. Because every function by now has its own highly iterative process that someone's figured out to do. It's not like, this ain't rocket science. Like people will be like, oh, it would be better to do this in a circle instead of in a straight line. Like, I mean, I did not invent that, okay? And I always get the and I always answer it the same way, which is like, listen, just between us designers, okay? Because they always like, isn't this just design thinking rebranded for those other dumb functions who aren't as smart as us? And I'm always like, it is. Okay, so, but do me a favor, don't tell the engineers. Think how they would feel if like they got tricked into doing a designer thing when they don't, that wouldn't like that. And if I walk down the hall, do that same event for engineers, I'm like, isn't this just Agile rebranded, but for the business, pointy-haired bosses? And I'm like, it so is. But don't tell the business people. And then I go, isn't this just customer development? Isn't it just lean manufacturing? Isn't this just DevOps? I have heard every variation of this. Isn't it just the scientific method? There was a blog post someone sent me once that was like, this is just the distinction between Hume and Locke, and there's nothing new here in the last 300 years. I was like, I can't help you, man. Like, okay, yes, you're right. There is truly nothing new under the sun, but I do feel like a few other things had to get figured out since Hume's day, even still, right? So like, who cares? Like, I don't care who gets the credit for it. I don't care whose idea is it. What matters is, are we doing that iteration at an enterprise-wide level? And the answer in all these organizations is no, we are not. In fact, if you take the God's eye view of most corporations and like zoom out, way out, visualize the silos of the company as if they were like big water silos, like a big Pringles can. You're going to pop the top off and look what's going on there. You're like, oh, look, the designers doing their highly iterative thing. Oh, look, Agile engineers doing their highly iterative thing, customer development. But how does work flow between the functions? Like, what is the output of the design thinking process? In a lot of very well-run companies, after all the experimentation and learning is done in the design silo, we print out a binder full of specification documents, and we linearly hand it to the engineers and say, implement this. All the learning has been done for you already. And the engineers, like, they get to page 5 and they're like, well, excuse me, it says here that this has to be both infinitely fast and infinitely cheap. but I can only do one of those two things because of the laws of physics. So which of them is it? And they're like, sorry, dude, that's your problem now. That's an implementation detail. You figure it out. So they're like, oh, well, shit, now we got to start all over again and now you go with those. And then they're like, okay, we're completely done. I've worked on agile teams, honest swear to God, where you print the gold master CD and hand it to the operations team to deploy. So the first time they ever see it is when it's completely done and all the learning is done. They're like, excellent, but like, how does this thing operate in the real world? Like, that's your problem, dude. That's a deployment issue, right? So like the work flows from function to function in a totally linear waterfall way. So this is just about saying we need to have a common vocabulary.
And it was a way to bring these functions together.
Let's break the silos down, unite the clans, like I gotta stop treating each other like we're the enemy. We gotta work together, build cross-functional teams, and denominate our progress not in functional jargon that nobody cares about. Like, with all due respect, can you get a business person to care about burn down charts? Anyone ever had any luck at that? You can't do it. The lean manufacturing people are constantly like, why can I not get business people to understand, how we do Kanban, and I get them to capacity constrain, and why they won't read theory of constraints, and it sucks. It's like, right, everyone has their local version of progress. We need a global version of progress, which obviously has to be denominated in the only common language of business, which is money. So like it has to be denominated in how we translate our incremental learning, iterative progress into some kind of financial system. And in the startup terms, we call it innovation accounting. The GE finance guys were like, please add this disclaimer, not innovative accounting, which is the thing you go to prison for. So like, do note asterisk, not innovative accounting. That's not what I'm talking about. Like there's a whole discipline to that. Anyway, that's the answer.
Great.
Hi there, my name is Gabi Weinberg. Startup Rabbi is my handle. Thanks for the like today.
Oh yeah, thank you, Rabbi.
So my question actually is from the angle of the nonprofit world. It kind of segued beautifully from your question, from your answer, that money is a very useful metric that everybody understands in the for-profit world.
Yeah.
And do you see translations of this in the non-for-profit world?
So you mean the intentional not-for-profit world?
Yes.
That's an important distinction, and actually that joke points at the answer to your question, which is you got to remember that the vast majority of startups have no profits for the vast majority of their like truly startup life. Like even after they go through product market fit, they tend to lose massive amounts of money, and like a lot of them keep on losing massive amounts of money through the IPO and beyond. Amazon, it's not clear that they're ever going to make any money ever from a financial accounting point of view. So how do we think about progress when the money that things are denominated in is negative or zero? And the first answer is that, well, first of all, the universal language of business, unfortunately, is not money earned, it's money spent. We all do that very well. Every organization spends resources, nonprofit, government. We're excellent at that. Entrepreneurs are very good at spending other people's money, are we not? So the problem comes in with you spend other people's money, they sometimes want to know what did they get for their money? What was my return on investment? And of course, during the flat part of the hockey stick, no matter what we're doing, return on investment is negative by definition. So I try to argue in the book that the right way to think about progress in any startup situation, for-profit or non-profit, is actually impact, not cash flow. And it's not today's impact, it's future impact. So that's easy to see in a nonprofit. Says you're like, look, what the purpose of raising money for this thing is eventually we're going to change the world to solve this very important social problem. But that's actually the same thing in a for-profit startup. However many customers we have right now is nothing more than evidence or proof of future impact. And that proof of future impact is an immensely valuable resource right now because it can be redeemed for resources at the grand universe's resource store, no matter what kind of thing that you are. Now, if you're a startup, it's really easy to see. Startup valuations are a combination of the asset value of the company you've built, your customer relationships, the money you have, your business model, plus the probability of a future impact. So it's three terms: the asset value plus the probability of future success times the magnitude of future success. So if you have a 1% chance to be a $1 billion company, that's worth roughly $1 billion right now. It's a very valuable lottery ticket. That's where startup valuations come from. But if you have a formula that can provably deliver a socially valuable outcome that can scale, that is not quantifiable in the same way through startup equity, but you can take that ticket to a foundation and say, hey, I got an outcome for you to fund, like, let me cash in my chips. And there's an analogous process that happens in government. So yeah, I think we actually have much more in common than we think in that.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm not Startup Rabbi or Startup Jesus, but I'm 16 years old, and I barely read, and I don't think any of my friends do.
Yeah.
But the Lean Startup was insane. And how have you thought about making the Lean Startup not in book form, so all my friends and everyone I hang out with and all of my generation can learn about it?
Kids these days, you know. I'm going to ask you this question. I have no idea. I'm so not a visual learner. Like, I can't even. They had to like twist my arm to get some diagrams into this book. Okay,
Well,
like
you've
can't.
done some videos related to this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like I've tried really hard to do some videos and to try to get in some short form, but like I suck at it. Okay, like if I could summarize these ideas in short form, I wouldn't have had to write this like 400 page. Like this is the shortest I could make it. Truly, if I had more time, I would try to make it shorter. But this is the best I could do. So I'd actually like. There's a number of people who have done like some pretty cool, you guys did some pretty cool animations that were kind of like sketch animations, short versions of it. I got asked on Quora the other day, are there Lean Startup songs? The answer is yes. You go on
There
YouTube,
is?
there are Lean Startup songs.
Can you sing any of them?
I do not know any of the songs because this is my medium, but I'm told that they're fine. There's a bunch of like comedy routines and stuff on YouTube. You can find some pretty cool stuff on YouTube, but like, I would turn it around to you. I would say if you think that's something that makes sense, like, run the experiment, make it happen.
Dope. Thanks, man.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so my question is in the "there's nothing new under the sun" category.
Yeah.
So I
Can you
wrote.
hold the mic up a little bit? I can't hear you.
Okay, I wrote a blog post recently arguing that the lean startup or the ideas behind the lean startup are basically what happened when immigrants got off the boat, came to America with no money in their pocket, and they had to innovate as quickly as possible. They had to get in front of customers as quickly as possible and figure out product market fit before they ran out of money.
Yeah.
And that to a significant degree, what allows people to kind of focus on product and making the best product in the entire world so that eventually the world will see their genius is the fact that they do have the comfort of, friends and family rounds or investment funding.
Yeah.
And so bootstrapping to some extent is, maybe advantageous in an ironic kind of way.
Totally.
So any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Well, two things. First of all, a lot of those immigrant voyages were financed. Like you can read some of these older accounts of like the starting of like really famous exploratory voyages, and like the biography is like full of all this like fundraising crap that these explorers had to do. Like the fundraising was really irritating. It took forever, and I'm like, oh yeah. I don't understand anything else about this book, but like that sounds very familiar to me. Like I know that all the like asses you have to kiss and all the promises you have to make and the projections. Christopher Columbus and his crazy projections, and the plot. Did anyone watch that TV show Black Sails? Like a pirate, like swashbuckling pirate show, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be excellent escapism. And then one of the plot lines in one of the seasons, a like colonial governor is coming to like subdue the Bahamas, and his creditors are on him to like deliver a certain return of certain. Like, I was like, wait a minute, this is too close to home. I don't want to hear about this. And like the Spanish are going to come like raise his whole thing to the ground if he doesn't deliver on the like financial projections that he's promised his creditors. So like, first of all, I think that like the idea of cooperative financing of ventures and risk spreading, like that's an old and important idea. That's like a foundational civilizational concept we're very grateful for. But there's also something about how overfunding can be as lethal as underfunding. We see that in corporate settings. Think about how many projects we've overfunded over the years. You see
Corporate people hate that, but the reality is they can do things with a lot less money.
So, and you'd be much better. The scarcity mindset that entrepreneurship breeds is actually super powerful. And speaking as a founder myself, it's actually a gift. This is something that took me a lot of years to understand. Being able to say to your team, we can't afford that, is super important to get everyone focused on what really matters. And when you're overfunded, you just don't have any moral authority to say, like, we can't afford that means I don't want to do it. Well, F you, I do want to do it, and why are you any more important to me just because I work for you? Like, screw you. So like it breeds resentment, whereas the true scarcity, we are in this together, says we all want to spend as little money as possible. And it's like you two can be like Steph Curry. You can't have a 35-foot jump shot, but you can like be dramatically overpaid for the good of the team. Like that's important. Like that's you only do that if you believe in the anyway. So like the scarcity is very important, and I hear often from immigrant communities and from people in developing countries who've read Lean Startup, who's been translating all these crazy languages. Sometimes they feel like their culture, their place has an advantage because they have that natural scarcity, and we Silicon Valley people are in for some disruption because we've gotten fat, dumb, and happy. And
Well, in some
probably
ways,
right.
your book is about just celebrating entrepreneurism everywhere. I mean, you're hearing from people around the world who it's not just Silicon Valley where entrepreneurism lives.
No, and in fact, I think the book, like Lean Startup, may have been more impactful in non-Silicon Valley startup hubs because it's more necessary.
Hi. I'm a software engineer and work for a big corporate, which I'm not going to name. And as you know, I feel it's a lot bureaucratic and things like that. So how do if I go tell my management saying that, hey, we might need to start thinking the startup way, they might give me some looks, right? So what do you suggest me that I can do from my end in convincing them or influencing them that maybe that's a great way to think about innovation?
Well, my only question is, how bad would it be if you get fired? Seriously, like, I take the question 100% seriously, no joke. If you can't be fired, it's a different conversation than if you can be fired. And if you're a software engineer, then you're probably fine. Like, you fire from this, there's like 100, we're in a war for talent. So like, not everybody has that privilege. And listen, I know a lot of people who feel like, I need this job, and I can't cause waves, and I have to be different.
And are they really going to get fired, or they just fear they're going to get fired?
Well, that's my question. So my feeling is in most, I hear the executive perspective is that we never fire anybody, and I wish we would fire some of these people, right? So like, I hear it from people who feel like, what do you have to lose? Just go to the most senior person you have any kind of relationship with and say, listen, I work at this company, and I think we could do better at blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell you a story. I guess I shouldn't name the company, but I know the story under a non-disclosure agreement, so I'll just say it generically. You know this company, and you'd be excited to know this happened at this company, but I shouldn't name it. An engineer, they told me this story. They were reading one of my blog posts about continuous deployment, and they took it to their manager and said, I think we should do this. And they were like, just like, I don't think it was like on a whim. They get summoned a few weeks later to meet the executive committee of the company, and the global CEO is there, and they're like, I heard you think this is a good idea. They tell me why, and they talked, and he said, anyone who doesn't think this is a good idea shouldn't work at this company, he says to all of his staff assembled, and they're like, oh shit, okay. So everyone thinks it's a good idea, he's like, you're in charge. He's like, I want to see a pilot program of this implemented with 2 teams, by such and such date. And they're like, it's like, fuck. Okay, and so he did it, and then he came back, and then they were like, that's pretty good, let me try, they scaled it up a little bit, and I remember like, this is a seasonal business, and he's like, yeah, but this was these were easy projects. I want you to try one of our like mission critical, crazy projects that during our peak season, like super project. He's like, show me that. They did a bunch of projects around that, and then he's like, I want every team doing this by such and such date. And like, this poor guy just had this idea that he mentioned to his manager one day.
I mean, quite a fortunate guy. I mean, he
it
took
turned
a risk
it turned out good for him, but like he was pretty stressed. Like it turned his he had a very cushy, like easy job that became like super stressful. Like, and to me, that's a true entrepreneur. He went through the S curve. They completely transformed that company's engineering organization. The whole thing, I think it took 2 years from waterfall development to continuous deployment, like the real, actual, honest to God thing. Every person I met at that company before that would have said, that's absolutely impossible. We could never do that, blah, 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 blah. 2 years later, it was completely done. And all it took was a CEO saying, anyone who doesn't think this is a good idea shouldn't work here. So don't try this at home unless you're ready for the full range of outcomes. Sure, you could be fired, but this could happen to you too. And I don't know that I necessarily would wish that on you. I know you that well, so do be careful.
I hope most companies wouldn't fire you for asking that. I mean, I think you'd have to try it a lot for somebody to say, hey, we don't do that here.
And the reason I talk about being fired is not because I think you actually will be. It's that you have to get over the fear of being fired. And I know I found that in one company I worked at, this is years ago, I remember having this moment where I was like, people are getting pissed at me because I used to advocate for this stuff when like there was no book written about it and people just thought it was stupid. So like I'd be constantly, we gotta ship more times a day and we gotta get more customers, and people would just be like, shut up, don't want to hear about that anymore. Like we're trying to do our plan. Like why are you constantly talking about that? So like I was very irritating. And I remember there was one moment where I was like, I think that I might have pushed it too far and I am in fact gonna get fired. And I was sitting there being like, okay, if I get fired, what do I want to be remembered for? Like, does it matter what did I stand for in that moment? And I was like, you know what? If I get fired for this, that's okay. Like, I'll sleep really well at night because I was fighting the good fight, and my reputation will be the guy who thinks we should iterate too fast. That's going to, like, ultimately, that's going to attract the kind of job that I want to me. So I was like, you know what? I will get fired for that. And then I was like, I'm going to try to get fired for that. Forget it. Like, I'm going to stand for the things that I believe as strong as I possibly can and not be rude about it, but also not compromise. Be like, this is how I think in my discretionary area of authority. I want to do things this way. If you don't want me to do it that way, like, please find somebody else to do it. And then, that worked okay for me. No guarantees. I don't know the company, so I don't guarantee this will go well for you, but I hope it does.
This will be our last question of the evening.
Okay.
Hey, Eric. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, man.
I'm curious, I run a self-development business, and you have such a rich sense of data of taking these ideas to executives and then watching them deploy it. I'm curious if you could share some predictors you've found of success in implementing these ideas and really building it into the culture, and also some predictors of failure when you can kind of just tell that it's not going to work.
I love that question. You're being very modest. This guy's a pretty successful entrepreneur under his own right. So I used to, I'll tell you what I used to think, and then I'll tell you what I learned. I used to think that a sloppy, kind of loosey-goosey, like anything goes kind of company culture would be the easiest one to change because there wouldn't be that much inertia, or, I was over like the top-down, rigid, hierarchical. There's like a tremendous activation energy to get started. And I remember one company, I did this with the top executives, and everyone was super excited about it. We coached some teams, and like, they really took to it like instantly. And I was like, this is going to be one of the greatest transformations I ever did. I was so excited about it. And I came back a few months later to check in how it was going. And they had done exactly nothing that we had talked about that day. And I was like, how come? They're like, well, you came in that day and told us to like do all this stuff. We thought that was awesome. But then like the next day someone else came in and told us something else. And then we started doing that thing. I was like, oh man, like whoever they talked to most recently, that's what they did, and they could not stick to it. So I actually have become a real fan of the highly disciplined, really top-down, like organized companies, because it's more difficult to get started. But when they say they're going to do something, and this is something I really admired about GE, there was never any question that if this worked, they could adopt it company-wide. Like they'd done Six Sigma and Workout. Like there's a play in the playbook to say, you know what, everybody, we're all moving this new direction. And, there was a big question about, is it worth it? Is it the right thing? Do we have the political will to do it? But, like, there was never any question that we're going to, like, if we decide to do this, we're going to do it. And there was never any question that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it all the way. So, like, when we first started talking, I was like, you're going to have to change HR policies and the corporate values and compensation and promotion. I remember several meetings where folks were just like, that's never going to happen. Come on, man. Like that.
It did.
Those are the third rails. You can't touch that stuff. And like all that stuff happened. They really picked apart the difficult, deep systems of the company. So that's certainly one lesson I see. And the second indicator I look for is, are the leaders willing to change their own behavior, or do they only want to change other people's behavior? So I often say to executives, look in the mirror. If you're not happy with the innovation results you're getting in your company, look in the mirror. Now you're looking at the problem. That's usually the last meeting I ever have with the company. Most people are just like, well, screw you, kid. Like, what do you know about whatever? And I'm like, nothing. But you asked me to this meeting to give you my advice about innovation. I'm telling you that the way you act and the way you hold people accountable, that drives behavior change. And the leadership teams, and I count Beth and Jeff in this category absolutely, who said, like, we're not offended by that suggestion, but said, okay, like, let's find out if that's really right. And I meet a lot of executives who are just too full of themselves, who they know everything, and like they're interested in innovation, sort of, but
they're more interested in being right.
They're way more interested in being right. It's entertaining to them to have this fight with me about whether they need to innovate or not. Like that's like corporate enjoyment, like it's on the dinner entertainment at their meeting. They're not serious about it. They're not really willing to change their own behavior, and I don't blame them. I really don't. These are people in a lot of cases who have had multi-decade careers being very successful doing a certain thing. And here I am saying, I never spent one day, I didn't pay my dues, I'm just some kid. And you have to change because it's not fair. Like human beings are not good at this. Okay, that's a hard thing for people to do, to admit that the thing I made my professional identity on, I have to change. So I really look for that introspection and kind of willingness to try things personally. That really makes a difference.
So Eric, in wrapping us up, you've taken the startup way quite seriously. You're fighting for the future. Talk to us about what's next and the long-term stock exchange as a way to wrap up.
Oh, sure, yeah. Just I have a day job now, apart from just being a professional expert. Actually, and if you read the Lean Startup, if you're one of the 6 people in the world who read all the way to the last page, which I understand most people don't, but one of the very last suggestions I made in the Lean Startup was that if we're going to emulate Toyota and Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and these kind of titans of long-term thinking and build new companies, then it doesn't make sense to build a venture ecosystem where the end result is we quote-unquote exit our companies into a capital market system that is infected with this incredible short-termism. This just makes no sense. And since whatever the capital markets want, we in Silicon Valley want too, because we want to build desirable, attractive products for that system. And that system is value destroying. The number of public companies is on the decline over the last 20 years. It's a system that eats its young, and it requires a steady supply of fresh meat to keep going. And we're the dealer. We prop this whole thing up while we're simultaneously complaining about it. Why? Because we get rich doing it. But then how does that make us any different than all the people we claim to be morally superior to, who I won't name? So I was like, we got it. If we're going to do this, we got to do it all the way at the level of ecosystem design and incentives. And for most companies, no matter how good your management system is, there's this malign gravitational force that emanates from the capital markets that warps decision-making to short-termism. I meet managers constantly. They even know it's wrong while they're doing it. They're like, I'm being asked to eat the seed corn and cannibalize the innovation projects, to make the quarter, and I know it's the wrong thing to do, and I do it anyway. So I don't know, we in business take this totally for granted, that just a fact of life, that's what it means. But these systems were created by human beings. They were not carved on stone tablets, and they're not laws of nature. We can do something different. So a couple years ago, I started a company we call it the Long-Term Stock Exchange, or LTSE. It's a new way for companies to be public, a new governance paradigm, a new way for companies. We offer companies the same level of liquidity that you can get from today's capital markets, but without the short-term pressure. And we just announced in the Wall Street Journal that we're going to be in operation next year sometime. So
Great. So thank you very much. Thank
you all
for
so much.
being
Really
here.
appreciate the
Thanks a
question.
lot.
Thank you.